welcome to you all to our autumn Opening the Angus online seminar for the Friends of the Angus. I'm very, very happy that you've joined us this evening, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting talk with Dr. Mallick this evening. My name is Emily Burgoyne. For those of you whom I haven't met, I am the Angus librarian at Regent's Park College in Oxford. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Friends of the Angus in just a moment, but before I do, I'm just going to outline a few practicalities about how the evening is going to run. So firstly, I want to let you all know that the seminar is being recorded this evening, and that's because it's going to be shared with other Friends of the Angus. It's going to be put on our YouTube channel for anybody who can't attend this evening so that they can join later on. Or so that they can watch it later on. If you don't want your presence here to be recorded, there are a couple of things that you can do. You can either turn off your camera so that your face isn't visible in the gallery, or now you've been admitted into the meeting, you can change the name on your screen so that your identity isn't recorded. And you'll notice that we have muted everybody, and that's to avoid any background noise interference. Please, can you stay on mute unless you're invited to speak during the Q&A session, when you'll be asked to unmute yourself. Please do use the chat function to let me know whether or not you'd like to ask a question, and write down a rough idea of what the question is going to be about. And then I'll invite you to unmute at an appropriate moment and you can ask your question. So there'll be a 5-minute break after Dr. Mallick's talk, when you can go out and make a cup of tea and stretch your legs and think of a really good question to ask Dr. Mallick when you come back. I'm just going to say a very few words about the Friends of the Angus. Many of you who are here this evening will already know about Friends of the Angus. It was started a couple of years ago by my colleagues, Dr. Chris Joynes and Dr. Carey and Sati, with a view to highlighting the importance of the collections that we have at the Angus Library and Archive. We wanted to have amazing speakers like Dr. Mallick this evening, who spent many, many days in the Angus doing his research. We wanted to have speakers to come along and talk about the research that they've undertaken in the Angus, but we also wanted to raise funds for digitisation and really important conservation work. And so far, thanks to the incredible generosity of the Friends of the Angus, we've raised just over £8,000, and that's gone towards the digitisation, for example, of the 18th century diaries of Jane Atwater, towards the church records of Cripplegate and Broughton Baptist Church. And it's also gone towards the conservation of an incredible collection of abolitionist tracts that were published and sold by the Baptist bookseller Martha Gurney, an incredible woman, as Tim Whelan, who's here this evening, will testify. So any donations, any kind of support means an enormous amount to me, my colleagues, and of course the collection. If you become a Friend of the Angus, there's no obligation to make any kind of a donation. You will get a newsletter every term, and we try to let you know about any events taking place or any talks. I'll put down the details in the chat function about how to join, just in case you haven't already, and how to make a donation if you wish to. But any kind of support makes a huge difference to us. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce this evening's amazing speaker, Dr. Saptarshi Mallick, who is a long-term friend and supporter of the Angus. Dr. Mallick is an assistant professor at the Department of American Studies at the University of Graz in Austria. His research area is American literary and cultural history, with a focus on transnationality and space. He has been a Charles Wallace India Trust Doctoral Fellow and a UKIERI Fellow here in Britain. He was also an Ernst Mach Fellow postdoctoral at the Karl Franzens Universität in Graz in Austria. He's edited 7 anthologies, amongst them most recently Sudraka's Mrukha Katika, a reader, which was published in 2022. Connecting Spaces, the Travelogues and Letters of Lady Abala Bose, which was published by Routledge in 2024, and Finding Philosophers in Global Fiction, Redefining the Philosopher in Multicultural Contexts, which was also published this year. He's been very busy. He is also an associate editor of Gitanjali and Beyond, an international open access e-journal of the Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies, which is based in Edinburgh. And he's presently the Joseph Sassoon Visiting Fellow to the Bodleian here at the University of Oxford. So we welcome you this evening, Dr. Saptarshi Mallick, with your talk, William Carey and Sati, a Baptist Missionary's Interrogation Against a Social Evil.
Thank you so much, Emily, and good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to see all of you here once again. And so namaskar, and thank you for coming and joining from India as well as from the UK. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let me just do this PowerPoint. I'll share the screen where the PowerPoint is present, and then I'll start my presentation. Is the PowerPoint visible?
It is indeed, Saptarshi.
So, may I begin?
Please do.
Okay. So today's my presentation will be on William Carey and Sati, as it's entitled, the Baptist Missionaries' Interrogation Against a Social Evil. My main purpose here in this presentation will be to interrogate certain gaps of history. That is, the historical documents and books in India established that it was Raja Ram Mohan Roy who eradicated Sati. But in the course of the time and with accessing the various archival documents, I see it was William Carey who actually started this particular fight against the social evil. It is unfortunate that that is not noted in most of the history books in India. So this is an archival presentation to vindicate and prove that it was William Carey who for the first time brought to the attention of the people and the government, the British government then in India, that Sati should be banished. And then Raja Ram Mohan Roy and the other 19th century reformers come in. Though the Europeans have claimed that themselves to be Christians and have asserted that their refinement, religious identity, and civilization, wherever they have traveled in this world, through the viciousness and morally degrading activities and ways of life, many of them have actually contributed to the creation of life of hollow pretense of the elevated principles of Christianity, which has thereby contributed to the development of a mighty rift between the goodness and their immoral ways of life. Such an existence of savage and unprovoked wars, tyrannical and imperial rule, ruthless and exquisite massacres perpetuated by the Europeans upon all the natives of the various nations of the world in the name of God and under the banner of civilization, where not only the peace of every nation was at stake, but also the moral probity and the principle of mutual faith, which are the natural propositions of Christianity, have ceased to exist. The moral blindness and savage recklessness of some of the Europeans, self-camouflaged in the name of Christianity, has not only been a poor compliment for their learning through religion, moral and political philosophy, but also proved to be a fatal blow towards their adhering to the principles of rational inquiry and adjustment. William Howitt, in his Colonization and Christianity, which has aptly critiqued such an attitude of life of the Europeans when he states, "We call ourselves civilized, yet we are daily perpetrating the grossest outrages. We boast of our knowledge, yet we do not know how to live one with another, half so peaceably as wolves. We term ourselves Christians, yet the plainest injunction of Christ to love our neighbor as ourselves, we are yet to adopt. It is therefore well evident that in spite of the Europeans establishing themselves as members of a race with superior knowledge, refinement, higher virtues, and noble character, they, through their inhuman activities, have been successful in interrogating their ideology and established themselves as members of a race characterized by crime and cruelty, a life of barren orthodoxy that dealt with Christianity but not Christ, as they royally ignored and drifted away from the hallowed principles based on affection, generosity, love, delicacy, decorum, justice, and fellow feeling. William Carey offered himself as the first missionary of Baptist Missionary Society who readily dedicated his life to a selfless devotion to the service of God and man, to make something in the nature of a permanent contribution to India and exert a healthy influence upon the people. Like a few Europeans, Carey, out of interest, tried to apprentice himself to know and understand India, not through an accepted grid for filtering the Orient into Western consciousness, where the Orient's identity is channeled into the general culture based on fevered fantasies of Europeans due to their ignorance and limited experience of India. The Society of Bengal, when William Carey and his associates arrived, was characterized by a strong conservation where values were lost. It was subject to casteism, obsolete customs, prejudices, and superstitious belief. It ushered in a life of wretchedness, inertia, stagnation in the society, drawing the attention of the reformers towards the need for education, which is the foundation of all happiness in future life. Carey was a man of conscience and compassion who had extended his sympathy while in England for the African slaves by boycotting the use of sugar, which was being imported to England from West Indies on account of the impetuous manner in which it was obtained, as an extension of his support for the halfpenny tract entitled An Address to the People of Great Britain on the Propriety of Abstaining from West Indian Sugar and Rum. William Carey was appalled to discover the prevalence of the social practice of sati, which involved burning a widow alive upon the funeral pyre of a dead husband, approved and authorized as a religious activity. In April 1799, on his visit to Calcutta to get typecast for his printing endeavors, Carey eyewitnessed the horrendous sight of a widow being burnt alive upon the funeral pyre of her dead husband, a sight which impelled him to stop such an inhuman activity, but was vehemently prevented by the natives, assuring that the widow had accepted the flames voluntarily and that he was blessed to have witness a holy ritual. Such a horrendous sight, like the slave trade, not only pained his compassionate heart, but also determined him to fight against such a barbaric activity, which was a disgrace for the Hindus and the English East India Company, until his incessant appeals in India and in England, which ultimately led to it being eradicated from the society in the year 1829. Carey's letter to Ryland on 1st April 1799, which has been separately entitled the Shohomorun, or the burning of a woman with her deceased husband, published in the first periodical accounts, not only give an account of such a cruel practice, which he eyewitnessed in spring 1799 in a village near Calcutta, but also fiercely describes his pain while narrating the savage undertaken by the natives through the practice of sati in the name of religion. Here is that big letter which Carey actually wrote, and you can see, I've highlighted some of the excerpts, that Shohomorun is actually a woman burning herself with the corpse of her dead husband. And this was something which Carey was witnessing for the first time. Carey asked to them that for what they met, and they told him that it was to burn the body of a dead man. And Carey inquired if his wife would die with him, They answered yes and pointed to the woman. Then Carey asked them whether this was the woman's choice or whether she was brought to it by an improper influence. They answered it was perfectly voluntary. Carey commented in the letter, it was a shocking murder. They told me it was a great act of holiness and added in a very surly manner that if I did not see it, I might go further off, and they wanted me to move ahead. Carey again writes, I exhorted the woman not to throw away her life, to fear nothing, for no evil would follow her, refusing to burn. The woman, had she groaned or even cried aloud, on account of the mad noise which accompanied the entire celebration of Sati, it was impossible for her to stir and struggle or to be hurt on the account of the bamboos which were forced on the dead body and over her, as well as the cymbals and other musical instruments, because they believed it was an act of religion. This particular letter is a detailed entry of the heinous practice of sati, which exposed not only the irrationalities undertaken by the natives in the name of religion, but also the necessity to bring life in the paths of righteousness through the abolition of such criminal rituals. In this context, I mentioned it was not just Carey. There were several 19th century Indian reformers, Bengali reformers, who were rising up soon to join hands against this heinous crime against women. Namely, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Kashinath Ghosh, and soon even Vidyasagar. William Carey and Indian reformers actually organized a crusade against this egregious practice of sati, as Carey believed that what is worth doing is worth doing well. So he not only collected data from reliable sources on the number of women subjected to such a cold-blooded murder and concluded that there were in Bengal alone 10,000 women subjected to such a Holocaust annually, but also concluded after an intensive study with Mrityunjay Tarkalankar that sati is neither approved nor obligatory in Hinduism and in its classical texts as an aspect of conjugal bliss. Therefore, it ought to be disapproved and repudiated with repugnance. Armed with his arguments and documents, Carey appealed to Lord Wellesley, the Governor-General, who, in spite of being on the verge of leaving his office, submitted the matter to the judges of the Supreme Court, and where in the motion it is stated that this court, taking into consideration the continuation of human sacrifices in India, is of the opinion that in the case of all rites or ceremonies involving the destruction of life, it's the duty of the paternal government to interpose for their prevention, and therefore recommends to the Honorable Court of Directors to transmit such instruction to India as that court may deem most expedient for accomplishing this object, consistent with all practicable attention to the feeling of the human beings or the natives. It was in answer to Carey's third memorial that Wellesley, on 5th February 1805, took the first step to protect Hindu widows from being immolated in the funeral pyres of their dead husbands under the compulsion of tradition and religion by formulating the famous dictum in his instructions to the judges of Supreme Court, which was placed in the course of the discussion as the East India Company House in Leadenhall Street in the perspective of Mr. Poinder's arguments. Wellesley's powerful dictum stated the necessity to consult the scholarly text in order to interrogate these heinous customs which affected the health and the well-being of the people. In all cases, reason and humanity is to be upheld. Unfortunately, in response to the letter on 5th June 1805, the court of Nizamat Adalat omitted all references but just humanity and morality, and consistently alone propagated that the opinions, customs, and prejudices of the natives should be consulted and that it would be impracticable at the present time. Though this sadistic practice was not abolished, but its inconsiderate and inhuman nature came into the forefront, subjected to immense criticism from Carey and soon from Raja Ram Mohan Roy through his Shambad Kaumudi and Nilratan Haldar through Bangadut. It was when Carey had provided the second deputation, the first report of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and in Sambad Kaumudi against Sati and Nilratan Haldar in Bangadut is published. Ram Mohan Roy was vociferously supported with learned natives like Darukanath Tagore, Prasanna Kumar Tagore, Munshi Mathuranath Mullik, Ramakrishna Singha, Ananda Prasad Bandyopadhyay, who publicly extended their support in reprobating the heinous custom. The Serampur missionaries vehemently supported the women's cause and zealously protested against the practice of sati through their Samachar Darpan and the Friend of India, publishing regularly the number of deaths they could obtain, estimating that between 1819 and 1829, more than 6,000 women were immolated in Bengal alone. The publication of this particular article on the criminality of burning widows alive, with a brief view of what has already been published on this subject in the 6th number of the volume 2 of the quarterly series of the Friend of India, was an active measure undertaken by the missionaries, the Serampur missionaries, through the print media to spread awareness among the masses against the inhuman practice of sati. Carey and his comrades denominated the issue thoroughly and addressed the people and the government on this unfeeling practice in order to awaken them and bring about a change in the society along with the social reformers by eradicating not only the practice of sati but also other ruthless practices which were in vogue in the name of religion. This article is actually an in-depth research and study by the author to interrogate the uncaring practice of sati from political, religious, and socio-cultural perspectives. The measures undertaken by the Serampur missionaries to spread education among the masses, including women, and initiate standards to enable the masses to realize the futility of sati, a practice which is more of murder instead of being religious. The title of this article is very interesting. It states very clearly that the practice of burning widows alive is a criminal act, and in the course of this article, the author thoroughly interrogates the conventions associated with this practice, establishing it to be an evil cult which is inhuman and deserves to be null and void. This is the opening paragraph which you have seen, and which we see that in the initial part of this essay, we come to know the research undertaken by Mrityunjay Tarkalankar, the chief Pandit of the College of Fort William and the Supreme Court, in order to study the validity of the practice of sati from times immemorial, beginning from Manu Smriti till the present times. In this study, like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he was able to prove the futility of the practice with the solitary exceptions of the opinions of Shunku, Ungira, Parasura, Harita, and Vyasa, who believed that inhuman practice to be a process of salvation, a life of connubial bliss in heaven. Citing several sources, Mrityunjay was actually able to refute the practice and emphasizes that women ought not to burn themselves with their husbands, and the act is merely the effect of concupiscence. As the Jwala Mala Vilas, which declares that the practice originates wholly in evil desire and is not the act of a chaste or constant mind. And the Mitakshura, one of the highest legal authorities, as declaring that by a life of abstinence and chastity, a woman may obtain eternal beatitude, and hence that her burning herself is wrong, and adds that in former ages nothing was heard of women burning themselves. It is found only in this corrupt and degenerate age. The author therefore disapproves the practice of self-immolation of the widow in the funeral pyre of the husband, and he vindicates his argument by stating that in the Shastras it appear many prohibitions of women burning themselves, but against her living a life of chastity, there is no prohibition. Against her burning herself, the following Shastras militate. The Mimamsa declares that every kind of self-inflicted injury is sin. The Sankhya philosophy that states that this useless death is undoubtedly sinful. And the Vedanta affirms that all work springing from the interested motives are to be abhorred and forsaken. A woman's burning herself, therefore, form the desire of connubial bliss, ought to be rejoiced with abhorrence. The author through his arguments, presents a brief analysis of the survey to validate that sati is neither an act of religion nor it is prescribed by the Hindu Shastras. Rather, on the contrary, it's a violation of the eternal principle of Shastras that human life seeks the true blessings from the good deeds that she or he has done during her or his lifetime. Sati was a process developed by the patriarchs of the upper classes of the society to coerce the weaker female sex out of selfish and barbaric intentions, establishing the inhuman practice to be no religious rite or custom whatever, and that it is not even the sanction of a national or civil injunction, refuting directly the laws of Manu and the fundamental principles of Hindu ethics. Therefore, the essay not only interrogates and exposes the evil and vicious nature inherent in the unnatural and barbarous act or the practice of sati on two grounds: the fear of infringing on the principles of religious toleration and the prevalent political inexpediency of interfering with the prejudice of the natives. It also spreads awareness among the general masses regarding the heinous sin of self-murder and the realizing the true aspect of life. In the year 1829, is considered to be immemorial in the history of India, as it is in this year the government passed a law declaring the eradication of evil practice of sati. 30 years after Carey was utterly moved on having witnessed the burning of a widow in the funeral pyres of a deceased husband. In 1828, Lord William Bentinck, after being the Governor General of India, was determined to cease the atrocious practice absolutely. The necessary edict was signed on Friday, 4th December 1829, and Carey was requested to translate the English into Bangla in order to have the edict published in both the languages. The request reached to him on the morning of 6th December 1829, which was a Saturday, when he exclaimed, "No church for me. If I delay an hour to translate and publish this, many a widow's life may be sacrificed." As a result, the translation was in the hands of the authorities before the day was over. Many natives welcomed this decision to stop the inhuman practice, and such a gesture was praised in the columns of Samachar Darpan. In the section Satis, published under Asiatic Intelligence on 25th June 1831 edition of Samachar Darpan, we see and we read a detailed report of the support of the natives headed by Kalinath Roy Chaudhary for extending their support to the Sirampur missionaries in eradicating such an inhuman practice. William Carey's life and activities emphasizes man as a fruit of history, a life form of his environment, along with the importance of their thirst for knowledge and the willingness to question orthodoxy. Such a perspective actually enabled him to explore the universal faculties embedded in him through an enlightened realization, an intellectual metamorphosis, which made him to realize the spirit of the world worker, which is Rabindranath's Jibon Devota, the Lord of his life, the source of his creativity and spiritual consciousness, which enabled Carey to connect his creative energy to all things as it flows through the world of creation and move beyond the boundaries of his physical existence to acts of goodness and empathy. That is, give importance to others before one's own self. This is the same romantic philosophy that Wordsworth wrote about when he reflected on man's empathy with nature and nature's sustaining and enduring power, which prompts man to those little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love amidst the din and bustle of life, tapping into his capacity for selflessness embedded in the hidden depths of his consciousness. This capacity for service is the truth of human unity, which is exemplified in our greatest delight when we realize ourselves in others, which was Rabindranath's definition of love, a bonding that comes from an association born of comprehension, produced through sympathy and cooperation, which Carey's life embodied. Though William Carey arrived as a missionary with an evangelical agenda, But with time, he was able to reject and rise above the world of futility, only to discover himself within others, leading to mukti or moksha, the freedom of in truth, that released him from mundane fetters, liberating his thoughts and actions, that is, existence, to be a critical cosmopolitan who embraced the Indians as well as India as his homeland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saptarshi. That was an absolutely fantastic talk. I'm sure everybody here would like to show their appreciation. Thank you very much. That was a really wonderful, comprehensive overview of Carey and Sati, and I'm sure that you introduced many facts that our audience this evening didn't know about in a really wonderful, articulate and erudite way. So thank you so much.